Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. Okay, folks, today we are going to be talking about one of Detroit's finest engines. We are not going to be talking about a specific car, but we're going to be talking about an engine that has gone into a whole entire family of cars. We're going to be talking about an engine that's known for its reliability, that's known for its durability, that's known for its tunability, all of its abilities. And that is the legendary Buick 3800 engine that has been produced from 1988 to 2008, and that has its roots going back all the way to the Buick Fireball V6 in 1962. This is truly one of America's well-known engines, most beloved engines, right there with the Ford modular V8 that was put into the Panther platforms. This is GM's most recognized engine, perhaps most produced engine of all time. This is something. This is quite something. And this is the reason why I wanted to share it with you all today. So what we're going to be discussing today in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing, first off, why am I praising this engine? What makes an engine a good engine to begin with? That's going to be segment one. Segment two, we're going to be talking about what makes the Buick 3800 engine a good engine and what criteria does it meet to earn such a moniker of being one of Detroit's finest. In segment three, we are going to be talking about the history of the Buick V6 engine. And in segment four, we're going to be talking about some of the best cars that you can get that have the Buick 3800 engine. And keeping up with what's going on in the car world recently, I am going to do a short follow-up on my podcast about the Nissan 400Z, because all of you who are privy to car news, who have been keeping up with it, Nissan has finally put out the official prototype for the Nissan 400Z, and I will be able to tell you my thoughts on that at the end of this podcast. So let's get started. Okay, first off, what makes a good engine? Well, there are several things that make a good engine. It's almost similar to what makes a good car, what makes a reliable car, because as you all obviously know, part of the reliability of the car, in fact, most of what makes a car reliable is the engine. Of course, you've got transmission. Of course, you got electrical components and build quality of the car itself. But I would say 70 to 80% of what you're looking for in reliability has to do with the engine. So I would believe, I am not a professional, but based on my own experiences, I would believe that build quality makes an engine reliable. Simplicity makes an engine reliable. Ease of access. And what I mean by ease of access, is it easy to work on or is it difficult to work on? Performance makes an engine reliable, or makes an engine a good engine, not necessarily reliable, because some reliable engines just aren't very good performers, but performance makes an engine good. and parts availability. Even though this is not a quality of the engine itself, you could have one really, really good engine, but if they made only 10 of them, and then those 10 are scattered all over the earth, I mean, that's not going to be extremely reliable, because when something breaks, you're either going to have it specially made, or you're going to have it ordered, or you're going to never be able to find it and never get the part that you're looking for. So you want something that is common and that is easy to find parts for. And those are basically what practically makes an engine a good engine. If you're going to be getting more technical, people who are going to be doing work to their engines, people who are going to be modifying them, then you get into the territory really of the ability to be tuned / modified. There's a lot of engines that are very good, but they aren't tuner friendly. For example, now of course this is not the best engine that I can think of, but this is one that comes off the top of my head. Cadillac's North Star engine that was offered from 92 to 2011. Good engine. At least relatively good engine, compared to some of the other things that were being offered at the time. Super complex to work on, though. Not necessarily known for its reliability, but it wasn't tuner friendly. It's not like you have a giant aftermarket for North Star performance parts and you're going to hop up your North Star that you have in your 97 DeVille. I mean, that's not something that people do. Rather, the North Star aftermarket is focused on making the North Star reliable, so the head bolts don't get stripped and the head gasket doesn't go bad. I mean, it's not necessarily focused on making the car faster, because the North Star is not a very tuner-friendly engine. It's not simple like a Honda engine that you could do whatever you want to it. North Star engine, I mean, it pretty much has to be left untouched because it's already finicky as it is. The Buick 3800, as you will soon find out, is not like that. Fuel injection. Now, I know this might be something odd. Oh, well, fuel injection. All cars are fuel injected. Well, all modern cars, for the most part, unless they're diesel, are fuel injected. Well, the reason why is because fuel injected allows you to boost your performance. When you inject the fuel right into the combustion chamber and the fuel and air mixture, it allows it to burn quicker, cleaner, and smoother, thus creating a smoother power delivery after the controlled explosion that's basically at the heart of all combustion engines. So you want fuel injection. You don't want carburation. Of course, cars haven't been commonly carbureted since probably, the mid to late 80s. But that's something you want. And especially when you're talking about older cars, older engines, I mean, you're going to want something fuel injected. Cast iron block. That's another odd thing. People don't typically think about what type of metal my engine block is made of. But let me let you in on a bit of knowledge. A cast iron block is heavy duty. It's made of cast iron. Cast iron, if your mother had a cast iron skillet growing up, you know that cast iron is heavy and cast iron is extremely durable. When an engine is made out of a cast iron block, that's the main component of the engine block, it's able to hold up to a lot of boost. This is not so for aluminum engines. Aluminum engines, though they are lightweight, aluminum is a softer metal. Aluminum is strong, but aluminum is also soft, prone to warping, prone to, warping under heat and whatnot. This is not an engine that you want to work harder than it has to. For example, I'm going to compare the Buick 3800 a lot to the North Star because the North Star offered better performance, but at a cost of reliability. And the reason why the North Star performed better was the fact that it was more complex, it was lightweight, it was an aluminum block. But that was part of the reason why it wasn't reliable, because you had things like cylinder liners, you had things like cylinder heads, things that would warp under heat, especially if the engine wasn't kept cool. A Buick 3800 engine is not that fragile as far as heat resistance comes, because it's a cast iron block. And and it's able to hold up to a lot of boost without worrying that you're going to crack your engine block when it's under loads of stress like that. Lots of tensile strength in cast iron. And there are no need for cylinder liners because the engine block is not so soft that it has to worry about getting superheated as the friction goes between the piston and the cylinder wall. In an engine that has an aluminum build, I guess, you need cylinder liners or at least scored cylinders to lessen the amount of friction that is happening between the piston and the engine block. The cast iron engines don't need to worry about all that. You're going to want a timing chain versus a timing belt. I know there are some great engines out there that are timing belt engines. I believe the V8 that Toyota put in the Lexus LS400 is a timing belt engine, but the 3800 is a timing chain engine. And the reason why you want timing chain versus timing belt, this is especially important on interference engines. Now, just to make a long story short, all cars have valves in their engines. Depending on how complex your design is, you might have anywhere from 2 to 4 valves per cylinder. You're going to have a couple of exhaust valves and a couple of intake valves. And when these valves open, they are typically actuated by a camshaft, either camshaft pushing push rods that's going to open up the valves at a constant rate, or you're going to have dual overhead cams or dual cams that are going to open them up at a variable rate or able to be opening them up at a variable rate. When these valves open, you don't want them getting caught on each other. Now, an interference engine, the valves get in the way of each other. So if it's not timed perfectly, they're going to get caught on each other, causing your engine to go kaput. There are some engines that are otherwise very reliable, but you must keep on top of changing their timing, either belts or chains, and timing belts end up going out a lot quicker than timing chains, obviously. Timing belt is rubber, timing chain is metal. Timing chain goes around a gear with teeth in it. It's going to last a lot longer than a belt that's going on a plastic pulley. Even if it's a metal pulley, it's just going to last longer if it's a chain. So when your timing goes off, your valves may not open at the time that they need to open. If it's an interference engine, they're going to get caught on each other. Good thing is about the 3800, it's a timing chain engine, and it's a non-interference engine, and it's actuated by push rods. So all of that makes it super easy to work on. And I personally have a Buick 3800 engine that is at 140,000 miles, and I've never done a timing chain on it because I've never needed to. The timing's never been off. And you're going to want typically push rod versus overhead cam. Overhead cam is not necessarily better than push rod. Push rod is not necessarily better than overhead cam. I will say that push rod is simpler. Overhead cam allows you to have variable valve timing. So especially if your car is a non-interference engine, between those two types of valve timings, I guess, there is a toss-up really. There's not one that's necessarily better than the other. So basically, aside from all that jargon, what you want in a good engine, you want something that's going to be easy to work on. You want something that's going to be simple. You want something that's going to be reliable, and you're going to want something that's going to be common. I mean, people nowadays especially want to get as much power out of their engines as possible and as inefficient of a size and as small of a size. And you know, the thing is, those engines are not always good engines. They might perform well, but they're not always good engines. And I alluded to this when I was speaking about my podcast that said, what makes cars reliable, and are new cars becoming less reliable? And I had said in that respect, yes, new cars are becoming less reliable because they have small displacement, highly stressed engines that are pumping out tons of power horsepower that these engines have no business pumping out. For example, you're getting i4 engines, 4-cylinder engines, pumping out 300 plus horsepower because they've got like 2 turbos strapped to them and all sorts of foolishness. And a lot of time they're aluminum blocks, so they're already taking a lot of stress. They're already under a lot of heat because they're high revving engines. I mean, this is a recipe for disaster later on in the car's life, especially with this stop and go foolishness that they're putting in cars. You see, when you have an engine like the Buick 3800 engine, of course, we haven't gone into specifics why the Buick 3800 is such a good engine, but I will tell you, it's very simple to work on, simple push rod design. I mean, if any major component goes bad on that engine, you know that it will be able to be replaced within a reasonable price. This is not so for all engines of that time period, especially not for what GM was producing at the time. So please stay tuned for the next segment of the podcast in which I'm going to introduce to you the specific specifications, yes, specific specifications of the Buick 3800 series engines that make them so good, that make them so reliable, that make them great all around for all sorts of different applications that GM used them for in the time period. So please stay tuned.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Okay, welcome back, car lovers. So we talked in the last segment about some general rules about what makes an engine a good engine. So now in this segment of the podcast, we are going to be talking about what makes the Buick 3800 engine so good all around. First off, it's common. I should say, first off, is the fact that it's common. Not necessarily anything is common about it, but the fact that there are millions of Buick 3800 engines that have been produced by GM since its inception. I believe the number was over 20 million or something of that sort. You'll find out the specific number later on in the podcast. So there are so many of these engines that were produced in a variety of cars in the GM lineup. Any junkyard that you go to today, you can find a Buick 3800 engine in an old Oldsmobile, an old Pontiac, in an old Buick, obviously, in some old Chevys. These engines were so commonplace. I mean, it's just like the Ford Modular V8. They put the Ford Modular V8 in so many things. It's almost like, the 5.7 liter LT1 engine that GM produced in the 90s for their big full-size cars, body-on-frame cars, some of their trucks, their Corvette. I mean, that's almost the commonality of the 3800. So, the thing is, like I said, and I will reiterate again, you want an engine that's common, so it's easy to work on. Mechanics know what they're doing. Mechanics see these all the time, and they know that it's a good engine because it's common and parts are available and parts are easy and cheap to find. You're going to also want to consider what makes the Buick 3800 a good engine is the fact that it is a simple engine design. I had alluded to this, but let's get more into specifics in this segment. It's got a cast iron block. Cast iron blocks, as you know, are more durable than aluminum blocks. And the cast iron design is 100% cast iron when it comes to the Buick 3800 Series 1 and the Buick 3800 Series 2. I believe in the Series 3, there were some components that were swapped out for aluminum instead to make it slightly lighter. But even then, the Buick 3800 wasn't an extremely heavy engine to begin with, considering the fact that it wasn't extremely large. I mean, it was a large displacement for a V6 engine, but it wasn't as large as a V8 engine. So it's not that there was much cost-saving benefit in it anyway by making it partly aluminum in the Series 3. You're going to say that it's non-interference, meaning the valves don't get in the way of each other. I had mentioned in the last podcast. The fact that it's a non-interference engine, your timing could be off. You don't have to worry about your engine self-destructing. There are some engines, I would like to, think some Japanese engines from Toyotas at the time are timing belt engines that are interference. I mean, I know how much we praise Toyota for their ingenuity and how efficient they are and how reliable they are, but honey, you don't want a car that's an interference engine that has a timing belt that will eventually go bad, because if you don't keep on top of it and if you don't get it changed exactly when it needs to be changed, you may wake up one morning, you go to try to start your car, and then the valves end up getting caught on each other after it runs for a little bit, and there goes your engine. Thousands of dollars worth of damage because you have to go in and replace all the valves. That's not something you have to worry about with the Buick 3800 engine. It is V6, so it is not horribly inefficient. I know it's obvious. From the very beginning, we said that it was a V6. But think of it. Think of the benefits of a V6 engine. This is why the V6 engine, for the longest while in Europe, was basically regarded as the V8 is over here. They are smaller than V8s. They are more efficient, and they are more efficient in several ways. They take less fluid, they take less gas. It's a lot better. So the fact that it's not a V8 makes you avoid the fact that it could be horribly inefficient. It has a large displacement for a V6 engine. Typically, V6 engines are in the 3-ish liter range, maybe high 2 liter. I mean, this engine is almost 4 liters. That's approaching the displacement of your average V8, especially of the time period, because there were some V8s that were 4.2 liters. I mean, this was a 3.8 liter V6. So what makes it so great in the category of large displacement is the fact that it has lots of fluid moving around, and because it's large displacement, the engine is not under so much stress, so it causes smooth power delivery. I'm not going to get too much into the physics of it because I'm not sure how physics work exactly, but it's to my understanding that the smaller the displacement of an engine and the higher that it is, the higher that it revs, because it has to work a lot harder to move the fluid around. There's a lot more pressure being put on the engine. Think of it this way. If you have large, unhindered arteries in your body, your heart doesn't have to pump nearly so hard to get blood through those arteries because it's able to flow properly. If your arteries begin to be narrower, thus holding less fluid, and the hole that the blood has to go through is smaller, then your heart has to work harder to get blood through those arteries. It's the same principle as an engine. The larger your displacement, the larger the path is for the fluid, like the cylinder bore for the fluid that the engine displaces, as far as the air, fuel, and everything. The less it has to work hard, there's less resistance. But the smaller it is, the more the engine has to work hard because it's under higher stress, especially if you have a car that is a V8 that produces 240 horsepower, is not going to be super stressed because it's tended to be large in order to make that much power. V6 is not going to be as stressed as an i4 engine that makes as much power as a V6. So that's kind of the benefit of the Buick 3800 engine, is the fact that it's large, it's not very stressed, and that offers smooth power delivery that makes it a favorite amongst tuners of this time period as far as tuners of American cars go. And it also comes in two variants. The Buick 3800 comes in a naturally aspirated variant, meaning that it is not forced induction of any kind. Induction is basically the airflow of the engine. You could have superchargers that strap onto the engine and that force the air to be colder, so the air is more dense, so it requires more fuel, so it causes the car to burn more fuel. But the richer the fuel and air mixture is, because the air is colder, then it makes the engine perform better. Or you could have turbo that forces the exhaust back into the engine to basically do the same effect using hot air instead of cold air. The Buick 3800, even though it never came in a turbocharged version, is receptive of both. It is naturally aspirated, or you could have a supercharger, and some people modify them, hence why I said it's receptive both to be naturally, not to be naturally aspirated, to be turboed instead of supercharged, depending on what they're looking to do with it. So it's very versatile as far as tunability goes. And all of these factors combined make the 3800 the ideal engine. It's known for reliability on account of simple design, smooth power delivery because of large engine displacement, and popular in the aftermarket because of tunability. Now, let me just explain to you what I mean by tunability, because you might be saying, well, David, this is an American engine. I thought tuner cars were typically Japanese. This is true. Not to say that American cars can't be tuned. And I will have you find that the Buick 3800 is probably one of the more common engines made by Americans that is tunable. I mean, of course, you obviously have your engines in Mustangs that people tune all the time. My friend Grant has his 2014 Mustang GT that he's dropped like 10 grand worth of work into tuning the engine, tuning the suspension, doing this, doing that, making it run as best as possible. Well, there are some people who do that with Buick 3800 engines. Of course, this is not typically your Buick Park Avenue, your Buick LeSabre, even though there are some crazy people who do that. We're talking about more your Pontiacs. Pontiacs especially, because Pontiacs have always been a sportier brand in the GM lineup. A lot of Pontiacs, the Pontiac Bonneville SSEI, the Pontiac Grand Prix GXP, those Pontiacs are very common as far as tuning goes. People would put turbos on these things. The Buick Regal GS is also a small enough platform that it's very receptive to tuning as well. Just like I said, people put turbos on these things, beat Mustangs off the line. People turbocharge them and supercharge them. People put smaller pulleys on the supercharger. People, do E85 tunes. I mean, there is so much that can be done to the Buick 3800 engine on account that it's super simple to work on. And these people hardly ever suffer, reliability issues when they keep their modifications down to a minimum that just allow the engine to either breathe better or to work a bit harder. Because like I said, the engine is tough. It can take it. The cast iron block can take a surprising amount of boost. It can take a surprising amount of abuse too. And the people who know this really make their Buick 3800 engines shine. Of course, you're going to want to be careful modifying any engine because there are certain things you just ought to not do to it. For example, you run the risk of chipping cylinders. You run the risk of chipping cylinders when you put a smaller pulley on your supercharger without tuning your car properly, because your engine is used to running a certain way, and then you go and get the supercharger to spin faster, thus making the engine to spin faster. And if it spins too fast, then you end up getting your cylinder heads, making contact with the cylinder itself, thus chipping the cylinder. So you will literally have a chunk of metal fall off your cylinder because it goes too far up the chamber and it hits the cylinder head and ends up chipping it if you have a supercharger that goes too fast. So that's something you want to be careful of. And of course, I praise the Buick 3800 engine, but just like any other engine out there, it has its flaws, but you will find that it has shockingly few flaws. One of the flaws that I have experienced myself are the plastic coolant elbows. Of course, every engine that is water-cooled is going to need channels for coolant to flow through to cool down the engine block. Well, on this engine, this part is known for going bad. These plastic coolant elbows, especially under the heat of the engine environment, tend to get brittle after a while and they tend to burst. This happened to me last year, 3 days before I was supposed to go on an epic road trip, by the way. Funny story. I'll tell you all that another time. I noticed that my car was running hot. And I had thought it either was my radiator that had gone bad, even though I had just gotten the radiator changed, or maybe it was my radiator fan that was going bad. But in fact, it was actually my coolant elbows that was causing the coolant to leak out, and then causing the engine to overheat, because the coolant elbows are made of this brittle plastic and they just end up bursting after a while and they start spraying all over the place. It was a very, very simple fix. Had it towed to the local mechanic. They charged me like $140 to change the coolant elbows, and the car has been absolutely fine since. That's one of the flaws that you're going to want to watch out for in a Buick 3800 engine. And another thing, this is not so much engine, it's simply the transmissions of these cars. The transmissions came in two variants. There was a heavy-duty version for the supercharged cars, and there was a regular version for the naturally aspirated cars. Though this engine is known for being a performer, the transmissions are not bad, but the transmissions are made of glass. Not literally made of glass, but the transmissions are very fragile. So a lot of times you get the car is able to handle the amount of boost that you're putting into it. It's able to handle all the modifications that you're doing to make it go faster, but your transmission can't handle it. Your transmission ends up failing. What a lot of people end up doing is swapping these transmissions that came with 3800s for the transmissions that came with North Star engines, because the North Star produced anywhere from 275 to 300 horsepower instead of the 205 to 240 that the 3800 produced, and they had the same bell housing pattern, so you could literally just bolt on a North Star transmission from Cadillac onto these cars and it would be able to handle the amount of power that was putting into them. So just the transmissions, beware. If you have a 3800 that you want to modify, beware your original transmission will probably end up, taking a crap, because it's just not meant for that level of power. It's fragile. These cars, a lot of times, especially in the Buick crowd, are grandma cars. They're not driven very heavily, so you don't want to go and overstress your transmission, have it break as a result of too much power. So please stay tuned for the next segment. The next segment, I'm going to be talking about the long and storied past of the Buick 3800 V6 and how it started, humble beginnings in 1962, and what it's become today and the legacy that it's left. And in the last segment, stay tuned, I'm going to be talking to you about some of the best cars that you can get with Buick 3800 engines. And in the last 5-6 minutes or so, I am going to update you on my views of the Nissan 400Z prototype and what I think of it. So you're not going to want to miss that. Please stay tuned to the end of the podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back, my wonderful car people. So in the last segment, we discussed the specific specifications, I said it again, the specific specifications that made the Buick 3800 such a good all-around engine to begin with. Now let's start with the history. The Buick V6 engine originally debuted in 1962 as the Fireball V6, which had a displacement of 3.2 liters. That's where it all began, folks. The Buick V6 engine was first known as the Fireball V6. It was a 3.2 liter engine, or I think like a 598 cubic inches, however they measured engine displacement in American cars back then. It started in 1962. Now, before I get into the history, I want to offer you a couple of fun facts. Did you know that even though it was developed by GM, it sold to Kaiser Jeep because the V6 was considered an odd choice of engine at the time when it came to American cars. But when the energy crisis hit, GM bought the design back from Kaiser Jeep and used it in their cars because at the time, American cars were mostly V8 engines. The six-cylinder was more reserved for European applications, even though in Europe, the i6 engine, which is an inline cylinder configuration, was very popular. But six-cylinder engines, just in general, weren't very common for American cars. So GM sold the design. They decided to make a quick buck off of it, and they decided to put more development into their Buick aluminum V8 engine. But, you know, as the times went on, especially fuel crisis in 1973 and the years approaching up to that were making, emissions harder to meet, that were putting gas guzzler taxes on cars, they decided that, you know what? Maybe we should buy our engines from Kaiser Jeep. And then Kaiser Jeep's engines, they made the Buick V6, at least a version of it, but it was too expensive to buy them individually from Kaiser Jeep in use of their cars. So what they end up doing, they just end up buying the entire design back from them and started putting it back in their Buicks to somewhat combat the fact that their cars weren't very fuel efficient. And so that's a small little fun fact. And the next fun fact is that the Fireball V6 was actually a derivative of Buick's aluminum V8 that I had just mentioned, which went on to be the Rover V8 engine, another long-lived engine. Rover is a British company, and I was actually delighted to learn about this because I had always been, exposed to the truth that Buick had very reliable engines, and I had always been exposed to the truth that the British couldn't make cars. Their cars tend to be extremely unreliable. So it was actually funny that the good, reliable British engine, the Rover V8, actually shares its roots with the Buick V8, which also is the root of the Buick V6 that was based off of that design. So it's like all in the DNA of these Buick engines. I mean, they've always known for being reliable, even if it, crossed the pond and went over to England and then became a Rover V8 and it became one of the most long-lived British motors of all time. I mean, even when it, decided to go across the pond and become British, it still retained its Buick heritage and was still reliable. So I think that's actually really cool. But moving on to the history. So the 3800 Series V6 was introduced in 1988. So the Fireball V6 had been offered for 26 years just about until the next generation of Buick V6s known as a 3800 came out. This is not to say that there were no Fireball V6s that were 3.8 liters, but this was not the series of engines that we know today as the Buick 3800. I believe that it got its moniker from the later Fireball V6s that were 3.8 liters and decided to rename the entire series of engines the 3800. These are the engines that I want to focus on, the ones that were made from 1988 to 2008. So within that, you have the Series 1 that was produced from 88 to 95. You have the Series 2, which is the most popular, from 1995 to 2004. And then you have the Series 3, which was from 04 to 08. Series 3 was not too much different from the Series 2, upgraded parts. I believe the heads were made of aluminum. There were different connecting rods and pistons and whatnot, but it was basically the same architecture of the engine. The biggest difference was between the Series 1 and the Series 2. And the Series 2 is largely hailed as the most popular of the 3 series of Buick V6s, and it's also the most common, and it's also probably the most reliable too. So we're going to be focusing much of our thoughts on the Buick Series 2 3800 V6, the one I actually have in my car, my 2004 Buick Park Avenue Ultra, of course the supercharged version that is. Horsepower ratings for the series, the 3800 series, range anywhere from 165 to 300 horsepower. I have no clue how they got this engine to produce 300 horsepower, but that's what my research said. But as far as what I saw, as far as the cars go, the Series 3 3800, the most it produced in any car that I saw was 260 horsepower. But obviously there must have been a unicorn out there somewhere that produced 300 horsepower from the factory, and they decided to include that in the ratings. But we're looking more so around the 160 to 200 horsepower range for your naturally aspirated versions, and 240 to 260 for your supercharged versions, especially the Series 3 supercharged was making about 260 horsepower. So let's talk more about the variety of cars that received this engine. These engines were put in Chevys. These engines were put in Pontiacs. They were obviously put in Buicks, and they were put in Oldsmobile. But I have to, gripe a little bit. This engine was never offered in Cadillac. And I assume it's because Cadillac has always been a more expensive brand, a more premium brand, and they tried not to share parts with lesser vehicles in the lineup, which from a marketing standpoint, that makes sense. If you're shelling out enough money to buy a Cadillac brand new off the showroom floor, you don't want your Cadillac to have something, in common with the Chevy from the other dealership down the road that's $20,000, $30,000 less. However, in the time period that GM was producing the Series 2 3800 or the 3800 series in general, you add that from 1988 to 2008. Guess what else GM was producing during that time period? From 1992, or 1993, I should say, to 2011, so basically almost the entire run, just about 3 or 4 years, give or take in either direction, GM was producing the North Star engine. Granted, the North Star engine hadn't always been a basket case, but for about half of its history, it was a basket case. So what I believe, and this is a very specific example, but allow me to entertain you all with this, because this is something I found very frustrating. The Cadillac DeVille from 1996 to 2005 came equipped with a North Star engine, your 32-valve V8 North Star engine. And the Cadillac DeVille from 97 to 99 came in 3 trim models. You had the base model, you had the d'Elegance model, and you had the Concours model. Now, riddle me this. Why couldn't Cadillac offer the base model DeVille with a supercharged Buick 3800 to get to 240 horsepower, so it's more than your average Buick, but still not as fast as the next trim level up in Cadillac? And then for the d'Elegance, they could have offered the base model North Star engine that made 275 horsepower. And then for the Concours model, which was the sport model, they could have offered the 300 horsepower variant of the North Star. I feel like if Cadillac had done this, then maybe they wouldn't have garnered such a reputation for unreliability in this time period. And same thing from 2000 to 2005. You could have offered, the Series 3 3800, put it a step above Buick. Series 3 3800 for the base model DeVille. And then 275 horsepower North Star for the DHS model. And then for the DTS model, then you could have gone all out and put the 300 horsepower North Star in it. So that way, Cadillac could have been reliable, and Cadillac, you could have still had Cadillac DeVilles on the road today. The reason why I'm salty about this is because I own 2 Cadillac DeVilles. The first one got totaled in a car wreck. It wasn't because of the engine. The second one, the North Star engine did me dirty, and something that doesn't usually happen on these cars, the water pump seized and broke the camshaft, causing massive engine failure. And I'm like, dang, if only Cadillac had put a Buick V6 engine in this car, I would still be driving my favorite Cadillac, and I would have no problems with it whatsoever. I put 28,000 miles on that car. I have put 65, almost 66,000 miles in the about same amount of time that I've owned my Cadillac as I've owned my Buick, and I've had absolutely no problem with it as far as engine goes. So, that's just one of those things. I wish that, the variety was a bit larger that GM put the Buick 3800 engine in, because in retrospect, it would have done them very good. But of course, this is not to say that people didn't swap Buick 3800 engines into Cadillacs. I've seen it done before. And those Cadillacs, let me tell you, are infinitely reliable because they've got the heart of a lion, if I could put it that way. So yeah, they were offered in several different vehicles, and they had a great reputation for reliability. At the end of production in 2008, about 25 million Buick V6s had been produced, making them one of the most common engines ever built. In fact, another fun fact for you. Originally, the end of production was slated for 1999. And when GM had originally announced this, they hadn't gone public with it just yet. Investors and customers had an outcry. They had said that, no, this engine is too reliable, it's too good, it lasts long. We don't want the fact that this engine is going to be discontinued to hurt GM, especially the people that were investing in GM. They thought that it would do GM bad if they were to discontinue the Buick 3800 engine. So what had ended up happening was that they had produced it up until 2008. So they delayed the discontinuation of the Buick 3800 due to public outcry for 9 years. And about halfway through those 9 years, they decided to do a last redesign on it to make it even more modern and to force even more power out of it into, what was going to be the last series of the Buick 3800 engine, which was the Series 3. Now, get this. The Buick 3800 engine was replaced by the GM high-feature V6 for the supercharged versions, and another Buick another GM V6 for the naturally aspirated versions. This engine would be completely made of aluminum, but because the Buick 3800 was so well engineered anyway, despite being 100% cast iron construction for much of its history, it was only 22 pounds heavier than the all aluminum version. That's just to put it out there. So they had gone through all this work of redesigning the engine, making it more modern, blah, 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 only to save 22 pounds in weight. Something that could have been easily accommodated for if they had just kept the cast iron block. And let me tell you, these V6s that came after the 3800s, the 3600s, pieces of junk. Just ask the car wizard that Hoovy goes to all the time. Known for head gasket issues, blah, 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 all sorts of reliability foolishness. But they could have just kept the original design of the Buick 3800 and kept the cast iron block, and heck goodness, they could have modified it for a Season 4 or Series 4. But who knows? The past is the past, so we're going to move on. Up next is segment 4, so please stay tuned after the break. We are going to be discussing some of the best cars with the Buick 3800 Series 2, and you're going to get my thoughts on the new Nissan 400Z prototype that Nissan has recently unveiled. So please stay tuned after the break, folks.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Alrighty then, welcome back, folks. So this is the segment 4. This is the last segment. I can kind of let loose in this segment. So, yeah, there were a lot of cars that had this Buick 3800 V6. And this was actually the reason why I had bought my 2004 Buick Park Avenue Ultra, because if I haven't mentioned in previous podcasts, this is my 4th car. I had 2 Cadillacs. I fell in love with the GM luxury sedans, the front wheel drive luxury sedans, because that was my first car, and I wanted something as close to my first car as possible when I had gotten my 4th car after I had done a brief stint with a hybrid Honda Civic from 2009 that was an automotive abomination that I only kept for 4 months until it was before it was totaled. So I told my dad, I was like, look, I'm going to get the money from the insurance company. I'm going to pay off what I had on the Honda, and I'm going to get myself a proper American luxury sedan. And I had done research on these Buicks because I had always known that Buick made semi-luxury cars. Now, the only ones I could think of were the Century and the LeSabre. I didn't actually know that the Buick full-size sedan was the Park Avenue until much, much later, until I had gotten my Cadillac. My Cadillac had died, and I was doing research on the next car to buy, and I was like, you know what, let me do some research on Buick, because I have heard that Buicks were reliable, but let me see what their full-size sedan was. I was going to settle for the mid-size, which was the LeSabre, which was still a very large sedan, but not as large as a Cadillac DeVille. And then I had heard about the Buick Park Avenue. So I had found out that the Buick Park Avenue was the same 3800 engine that made the LeSabre so reliable, except it was larger. It came in Ultra version, and it was basically the Cadillac of Buicks. And I was like, man, I came from a Cadillac. I can go down to basically something that is as good as a Cadillac, but a lot more reliable, and thus I settled for a Buick Park Avenue Ultra. So I just wanted to, put that little anecdote out there to make it known how I found out about the Buick 3800 engine. But this car was this engine was so common in so many cars. There are so many great cars that you can get out there. And I put this list in not a particular order, but to let you know not only the variety of cars that you can get with the Buick 3800 engine, but, the ones that, upon peering about the list, I thought were the best. So you have your Chevy Camaro. I believe the 1996 to 2002 Chevrolet Camaro had a naturally aspirated Buick 3800 engine. Of course, this wasn't the only engine available. I believe they made it with a V8 as well, but that had a naturally aspirated Buick 3800 engine as one of the engine choices. That same engine, this was used in a rear-wheel drive conversion for the Chevrolet Camaro. It was not front-wheel drive, but the same engine was used in front-wheel drive application in the Buick LeSabre from the same time period. And the Buick LeSabre, in fact, was at one point the best-selling mid-size car in all of America. So You could get a Buick with the same engine as a Camaro. You can't do that anymore. But that was how common and how versatile the Buick 3800 engine was. You had the Pontiac Bonneville SSEI. Now, those two before were naturally aspirated engines, but this one is the first supercharged engine on our list. This is a supercharged Buick 3800 V6 that made 240 horsepower. That was in the Pontiac Bonneville SSEI. This car, they're not extremely common, as a matter of fact. And you will find that the Pontiac Bonneville was one of the few cars that wasn't a Cadillac that received a North Star V8. And, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I should probably do a podcast on the North Star V8, and just to let you all know how versatile that engine was. And frankly, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. I know that's an unpopular car opinion, but I would say, after owning two of them, and we've had four in our family, it's not as bad as people make it out to seem. I'm actually quite fond of the North Star engine despite its flaws. But the Pontiac Bonneville SSEI also had a supercharged Buick 3800 engine. The Pontiac Grand Prix, especially the GXP model, had a Buick 3800 supercharged V6 engine. These cars, the reason why I put them on this list actually is the fact that they're so popular amongst tuners. In fact, there is a whole Facebook group that I'm part of that is dedicated to Buick 3800 performance. And these guys swap different ideas. They share pictures of their builds. They ask for advice, all about their Buick 3800 engines. And I will tell you, the vast majority of these men in this car group, and of course women too, women can also be interested in cars. The vast majority of these people have Pontiacs, and they are tuning them. They are, lowering suspensions, putting control arms, blah, 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 doing all of this. And they have Buick 3800 engines, and they are very proud of them, and they tune them till the cows come home, if I could put it that way. And not only that, the Buick Regal GS, which, dare I say, was the spiritual successor to the Buick Grand National. I mean, this was a performer. This was not your grandpa. This was not your grandpa's Buick. The Buick Regal GS, the Buick Regal was basically, how could I put it? It was basically the same car as the Buick Century, except the Buick Regal had a Buick 3800 engine. I believe the Buick Century had a 3100 engine that wasn't nearly as reliable as the one in the Regal, which was obviously the 3800 that this whole episode is about. And it had a GS version that was supercharged. In fact, my grandma's pastor's son, a friend of mine, had a Buick Regal GS with a supercharger, and he was actually, he was kind of, sizing me up because he saw that I had the Park Avenue with the Buick 3800 supercharged engine. He asked me, is that thing supercharged? I was like, yeah, it's supercharged. He's like, wow, you got the nice one, because he got the smaller, sportier one. But honestly, if he had known, I don't know if he tuned it at all. He probably didn't. But he would know that his car had a lot more possibility of tunability than mine. I mean, mine, it's large. It's a Park Avenue. It's not meant to go fast. It's not meant to turn corners. Neither is the Regal GS, frankly. But the Regal GS, because it comes in a smaller package, I mean, is a lot more accepting of performance of that caliber instead of a big floaty Cadillac Boulevard ride that you get in the Buick Park Avenue. But, it was kind of cool nonetheless. So that pretty much wraps up what I think of the Buick 3800 engine. I was very excited to do this podcast. I was like, you know what? I'm going to tell these folks about the Buick 3800 engine. I'm going to say all the good things about it. I'm going to start with the history. I'm going to talk about what makes an engine a good engine, because literally every time I go to the mechanic for anything with my car, they find out that I've got a Buick 3800, especially it's supercharged. They're like, wow, that's a good engine, man. That's one of the best engines that ever came out of Detroit, blah, blah, blah. I always get compliments. When I had my Cadillac, Miss Faith, my pearl white Cadillac DeVille, my second Cadillac, I used to always get compliments on the car itself. They're like, oh, that's a nice car. It's so pretty. Because my car was pretty. I'm not going to lie. It was real pretty. Pearl white, gold trim. I mean, it had all the fixings on the outside, save for a vinyl roof. It was really pretty. I used to get compliments on the appearance. I don't always so much get compliments on the appearance of my Park Avenue. Not to say it's ugly or anything. It's just, it's not as pretty as a Cadillac. I always get compliments on the engine because people know the reputation that these Buick 3800 engines have. And not only that, my aunt, when she bought her first car, she had seen my car and she's like, you know what? I want one just like David's car. So my dad ended up helping her find a 2005 Buick Park Avenue Ultra, same color as mine, same engine, same everything, save for the fact that hers has the bucket seats in the front and mine has a bench seat. She ended up buying almost the same exact car that I did because she had just fallen in love with it. So, the thing is, these cars are not for everybody, but the people who have them tend to really love them, and they treat their owners extremely well. So that's basically my thoughts on the Buick 3800 engine. And keeping up with car news recently, if I could say this is a breaking news segment, Nissan has finally unveiled their rendering of the Nissan 400Z prototype. And this has been gaining a lot of attention in the car world. I believe my fourth podcast, which might be episode number 6 or something, go back and look for the my thoughts on the Nissan 400Z, the elusive Nissan 400Z is what I called it. They finally unveiled it. And let's just say it's gaining a lot of attention. I wouldn't say praise is the exact name for it. Of course, Doug DeMuro has his own thoughts on this, and frankly, I should probably watch that video on my way to work today. But before I even watch what anybody said, I have just been seeing the posts on social media. I have friends that post about this car that don't even typically post about cars, that they even know are car people. So it's even getting car people or closeted car people out of their shells to talk about it. That's how strong the reaction is. And the reaction is not the best. I'm disappointed. Of course, it's still a prototype, so maybe they might respond to the backlash that they are facing and make the design a bit better. But we were expecting something that was supposed to be, I don't know. I guess we were expecting something that was going to be retro because that seems to be the way that everybody's going, or at least attempting to be retro, or something that's going to be futuristic and super cool. Here, we just got... You all have to look it up, the new rendering for the Nissan 300Z prototype that Nissan officially released. You're going to have to look it up. We got this somewhat half-breed. It's half retro. It's kind of not half retro. It's just hard to explain. I mean, I don't like it. It's not that great. I think it looks too much like a 350Z. It looks too much like a 350Z, which the 350Z, I mean, coming from the time period that it came from, obviously was going to have plain styling because, I mean, that's what cars were back then. They were more plainly styled than they are now. But it's trying to be futuristic with like the LED strips and the headlamps, but it's also trying to be retro by the fact that the headlamps are more round. But my biggest gripe about the car is that grille up front. The grille looks like such an afterthought. Like, you have this round car that's got these flowing lines just like the 350Z. The 350Z wasn't extremely showy or overstyled, but it was a nice, simple, clean design. And you've got a design that was that's reminiscent of that. And by the way, it's still built off of a heavily modified version of that platform anyway. So we didn't expect it to look extremely different in retrospect. But then they've got this not this triangular. It would have been better if it were triangular. This square cut-out grille. Like, it's literally like they went into the front of the car and sawed it out and then removed the piece of plastic and beveled the edges a little bit and called it a day. I mean, it just looks like a giant hole in the front bumper. It's It's horrendous, frankly. It's horrendous. I mean, you have this nice flowing round bodywork and all of a sudden this square cutout grill that looks like such an afterthought. And then the people who are defending it, they're like, oh, well, it's retro like the 240 Fairlady Z back in the day. Well, you either go full retro or you go no retro, unless you can be like Ford with the Bronco and pull off somewhat half retro, half modern. But obviously Nissan can't do that. So I saw a better rendering of it in which there was like this wide body kit with the fender flares and everything. And they did the slightest change to the front bumper. They split it in two. And the car immediately looked 1,000 times better. So I am hoping and praying to God that when Nissan finally releases the official 400Z that's not a prototype, they go through and they fix that wretched grille up front that just looks like a giant square hole. If they don't, I anticipate that they are going to get a lot of backlash. So thank you for listening to this edition of the GSMC Car Podcast. If you haven't already, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Leave us a nice comment. Leave us a review. Share it with your friends. Tell the whole world. Tell Queen Elizabeth. Tell everyone about the GSMC Car Podcast. And thank you so much. Those reviews, those likes, those shares that you do, it really helps us. And thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.